Okay, so now let's talk about the suicide issue. And it was in 2003 that newspapers and the nightly news and so forth came out with these concerns about increased suicidality in children taking antidepressants, and then eventually it was extended to adolescents and then young adults. Okay, so let's see what the story is here. Now, this study never got published, but it was done by the government in England, where they also have socialized medicine. You can get on the internet. You can, go england.gov or something. I don't know where you go, but you can track it down if you want. But here's what they found. Okay, 1,300 adolescents. Again, not kids. All right, but they all had major unipolar depression. Okay, and they treated them, I think, for 18 weeks and increased suicidality. You can see that there was a difference. Half of them had placebo, half had Paxil. Let me stop for just one moment and mention something. A shift is taking place now, and the FDA is supporting this, and that is when you have real serious medical conditions. It used to be you'd have to get the drug approved by FDA. You had to show significant, efficacy beyond placebo. But increasingly, they're saying, like with kids, are we going to expose kids, to several months of placebo if it doesn't even work? Or what if we have a disease that gets progressively worse? So the FDA is beginning to say, instead of placebo control, for some of these diseases that can get worse if you don't treat them, then the test would be to have the new drug compared to an existing drug that has proven efficacy, which I think really makes a lot of sense. Okay, but in any event, this was placebo versus Paxil, and those are, because of the large sample size, they are statistically significantly different, and so that has got to get our attention. Okay, now, there were no actual suicides, but there were suicidal incidents. Now, what does that mean? Let me see. Actually, I left one slide out here. I apologize. Let me just tell you, suicidality is this broad spectrum of behaviors, okay? At the severest end, obviously, are actual suicides. Next to it are very lethal suicide attempts that somehow miraculously the person didn't die. And then it moves down in terms of severity into suicidal gestures, and then just suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideations. And unfortunately, and this is a big problem, they've included under this umbrella self-mutilation that you see with borderline personality disorder, like burning and cutting, which has nothing to do with wanting to die. It's tension reduction. It's just the opposite. And so that should be completely taken out of there. Now, there's the slide that I left out here, and I meant to put it in, but there's a group of researchers who came back and reevaluated this, and the suicidal incidents that were reported, 50% of those were in the either burn yourself, cut yourself, or I have ideas about suicide, not attempts, not gestures. 50% were in this category of either, burning and cutting, or I feel more suicidal ideations. Okay. Now, but what's even more interesting here is they did the study for 18 weeks, and then they stopped the study, and they followed these kids for 28 days and continued to track their symptoms and behavior. And there were actually about half of the suicidal incidents in the Paxil group occurred, guess when? After they stopped the medication. Now, is there something wrong with this picture? Did that get on the nightly news? I don't think so. What happens? You get improvement and you jerk the medication away after 18 weeks? In a month, 50% of people relapse? Also, one of the suicide attempts, and I'm not making this up, a girl slapped herself and they counted that as a suicide attempt. Now my guess is you'd have to slap yourself really hard, for that to be life-threatening. Okay, all the same, I think I'm making a comment here about the media, how they sensationalize and don't tell the whole story. But still, it's got people's attention, and it should. Okay, now, in the TAD study that we just looked at, okay, NIMH study, at baseline, 29% of these kids came in with suicidal ideas. No big surprise, they've got major depression. Okay, attempts during the study, 12-week study, about 1.5% made an attempt, or no actual suicides. And if you look at, these are paper and pencil measures of suicidality, starting at the beginning and then at the end of the study. Obviously, it's not zero, but group-wide, there's significant decrease in suicidal ideations. Okay. FDA data, they now have, this is a whole bunch of studies, and they have 4,400 children and adolescents who have gone through these registration trials with FDA, and some of these are for anxiety disorders, like OCD, for instance, where SSRIs are used often with kids. Many of them are for depression. And what they have found is that in the 4,400 subjects in all of these various trials, there were 0 suicides during the study. Okay. Now, you know what? I'm going to just skip these 2 slides. They're too busy. I'm just going to skip over this and go to this one. First, let me mention, I have a newer slide. I will tell you this, you can add this if you're interested. Between 1952 and 1990, there was a 300% increase in adolescent suicides. 1952 to 1990, 300% increase in adolescent suicides. Okay, now, between 1957 and 1985, if you look at all age ranges in the United States, there was a 31% increase. So this is, across the entire spectrum. And it's been increasing gradually and steady, but especially disproportionately with adolescents, okay? Now, in 1986, Prozac was put on the market. And you can see here that very quickly, it started being used a lot, and Paxil came along next. And the reason there's such a huge increase in prescriptions is because prior to this, every single antidepressant, you could take about a handful of that and it'd kill you. So primary care doctors and pediatricians were not about to use antidepressants very often because they were afraid that the kids would overdose on them and die. Because like tricyclics are very, very toxic drugs, okay? But now they have drugs, and like you could take a bucket full of Prozac and it won't kill you. You've had the worst diarrhea that you've ever had in your life. You probably wouldn't do it. You probably could hold a bucket inside your stomach. But anyway, this is one of the reasons, okay, is because, okay, well, they're not toxic, so, we'll use them. Okay, now, during 1986 to 1999, there was a turnaround, 13.5% decrease across all age groups. Everyone here has sworn an oath. Correlation does not mean causation, right? Right, everybody know that? Well, most of the time. Okay. Now, the World Health Organization also states that most people who die from suicide weren't receiving any treatment at all, but that's just a side issue. Okay, now, let's take a look at little kids. Ages 5 to 14, in this 2-year period of time, 933 actual suicides. Only 5 of these were under the age of 10. And if you go back, if you look at any time frame, we're talking about, single digits for little kids. Suicide is extraordinarily rare under the age of 10. But boy, after the age you get 10, it starts really going up. Okay, but in this 2-year period of time, there still were some parts of the country, and to some degree now, that were using tricyclics. And these were mainly really poor states: Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, Arizona, Alabama, I think. And so what the CDC, Center for Disease Control, has data on every prescription in the United States on a county-by-county basis. And what they found is in these young kids, young teenagers, you can see here those states that were still using a lot of tricyclic antidepressants, they had really significantly higher actual suicides than where the new antidepressants were starting to be used a lot more. And that's statistically significantly different. Okay, now between 1990 and 2003, if you look at the age group that is highest risk really for suicides, between 10 and 24, during this time, and this was 4 years after Prozac came out, Paxil was out, and Zoloft came out, there had continued to be a decrease, and there's a 29% decrease in this age group. All right. Then, 2003, all the media attention comes about, antidepressants causing suicide or increased suicidal behavior. And it was estimated in the year that followed that that there was, depending on what part of the country, between a 30 and 40% decrease in prescriptions for antidepressants for kids. And during that time, we have a turnaround here, and we have an 18% increase in suicides in this age range. Now, let me tell you something, okay? If you look in the PDR, or if you look at package inserts that come with medications, they will have black box warnings for the things that are like really potentially quite serious side effects. I mean, they have lots of other side effects, but this is stuff like that might kill you, okay? There's a black box warning for every antidepressant now that says can increase suicidal behavior or ideations in children, adolescents, and young adults. But there's one difference, and that is, and this is different than every other drug in the entire PDR. The FDA also, after that, says, however, failure to treat depression also carries with it a significant risk of suicide. And they don't say that with any other black box, and that's because, and that's newer. The first black box didn't have that; they've added that, and now the data is accumulating that, whoa, maybe our speaking out about this is actually backfiring and resulting in a lot of people not getting treatment and increased suicides. So I think that's what's happening. Now, when can antidepressants provoke suicide? Okay, there's two groups, and the first one is probably the one that's the most important to watch out for, and that is in children and young teenagers who have bipolar disorder. Now, if you look at childhood or early adolescent onset bipolar, when you have manias, the majority of manias are dysphoric manias. That's not true with adults and older teenagers. There, the majority are euphoric. They're grandiose, and expansive and that kind of stuff. Dysphoric manias, you all know about this, but it's agitation, rapid thinking, but extremely severe depression, very, very high suicide rates. In fact, dysphoric mania and psychotic depression are the two psychiatric conditions that have the highest suicide rates. Okay, so it's looking like antidepressants can, well, it's been known for decades. Antidepressants, you give them to bipolar people, and they can flip into mania. Give them to kids, they flip into mania, and the majority are going to flip into dysphoric manias, and you can get suicides. Okay, so that is a very high-risk group. So you say, oh, antidepressants don't contribute to suicide. No, wait just a minute. In this group, they really can. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
Is that just for children or also for adolescents?
After the age of 15, okay, after you've completely got through puberty, then the majority, probably 70% of manias are euphoric manias, and only 30% are dysphoric. Okay? And we'll talk, it gets dicey. We'll talk more about that after a while. There's another group also, and these are kids who have started treatment, but the medication has not started to work. Okay, and we were taught. I was taught in graduate school. Well, they start getting a little better. They get some energy, and now they got the energy to kill themselves. Well, there's not any solid data to support that. I mean, that may have face validity, may be true, may not be true. But it's also true for psychotherapy too, or any other treatment for depression. In the early stages of therapy, people don't respond quickly, and so there are suicides. And it's possible that kids in this early phase may experience activation. Remember, have somebody that's really suicidal, their whole life feels horrible, and they go home and they don't get a tranquilizer with it, and a day later they're climbing the walls and they may kill themselves. Okay, so that is to say there may be a period of higher risk in the startup phases of treatment for kids that have unipolar depression. Probably the biggest problem of all is with these kids that have been misdiagnosed with unipolar when they really have bipolar.